Okay, we're rolling.
All right, this is a home interview at the Beltran Living Center, Latham, New York. It is the 9th, I think it's Colonie here, isn't it? Colonie. It's the 9th of February 2007, approximately 1 p.m. Interviewers are Mike Russert and Wayne Clark. Could you give me your full name, date of birth, and place of birth, please?
Arnold J. Townsend is my full name. I was born in Middletown, New York, August 27th, 1920.
Okay. What was your educational background prior to entering service?
High school. I enlisted in 1940.
All right. Do
If
you
I hadn't
remember?
enlisted, I would have been drafted anyway, so I wanted
Okay.
a choice of joining the organization that I wanted. That's why I joined the Marine Corps.
And why did you decide to join the Marines?
I thought it was the best organization at the time.
Okay. Do you remember where you were when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
When I heard about Pearl Harbor, I was in New York City with my fiance, attending a Frank Sinatra show at the theater right on Times Square. Walked out of the theater at that time and it said Pearl Harbor had been bombed. Everybody report back to camp. Well, I was in the service at that time, so I was headed back to camp anyway that weekend. And that's the first recollection I have of Pearl Harbor being bombed.
Okay. You enlisted in 1940. Why did you decide to go in at that time?
As I explained, I was eligible to be drafted where I was
Okay.
registered right out of when I finished high school practically. I waited a little bit. It wasn't exactly when I got out, but I decided I want to go in the organization I want to join, not be drafted.
Okay. Where did you go for your basic training?
Parris Island, South Carolina.
What was that like?
Well, Parris Island at that time, it was 16 weeks of intensive training. The last 4 weeks of the training was spent on the rifle range.
Now, what were you using at that time? The 03? The Springfield 1903?
That's right, the old Action Springfield 03 rifles. We fired at 100, 200, 500, and the 1,000-yard range was even open at that time, but training was not given on the 1,000-yard range. Back then it was up to 500 yards, they still trained you. We shot 500-yard range at that time with the 03s.
Now, did you still wear the old World War I type helmets and so on?
That's right. Yeah, all the things, rations, equipment, practically what we had was carryover from World War I, you might say. After I enlisted in Parris Island, I went through training there, boot camp so-called. They shipped me directly to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, and that's where the 1st Marine Brigade was established, and that was the beginning of the 1st Marine Regiment. We came back to the United States after 6 months down there and came to Camp Lejeune area and organized then the complete table of practically the 1st Marine Division. They added not only the 7th, which I was assigned to, but the 1st and the 5th. 5th at that time was organized in Quantico, Virginia.
Was there still training? Was there just constant training going on?
Constant training all the time. Right? The Marine Corps, fortunately, I guess you could say, anticipated there was going to be a war. And we wanted to be the troops that were ready for it, and they were. And I'll tell you one thing, you're damn lucky the 1st Marine Division was ready for it too at that time, because there wasn't any other organization capable of making a landing any place.
Now, some of your older NCOs and officers, were they World War I veterans?
Some of them were, yeah, a few of them. One of my older commanding officer was Chesty Puller, who was a well-known figure in the Marine Corps. And I met him at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. He had just made captain at that time, back in those days. But he's a carryover from the Honduras and all the operations the Marine Corps had after World War I back in that time. But Chesty was in the end of the World War I. He was attending VMI at that time, Virginia Military Academy, and they drafted him and he went into the Marine Corps at that time, and that's how he started in the Marine Corps, from VMI.
Now, what kind of, did you get any additional training while you were at Lejeune, or?
Well, there was training all the time.
Mhm.
Yeah, maneuvers, constant maneuvers all the time. And we were in charge of patrolling the beach at that time. If you recall, maybe you don't, there was a lot of German submarine operation going on at that time along the Atlantic coast, and especially in the Caribbean area. That's why we were there in the Caribbean area, because of the German submarine activities. And so we did a lot of combat patrolling and so forth along the beaches of the eastern coast of the United States, southern part.
Did you do any landings or?
Constant landings all the time. Marine Corps is an amphibious organization, I guess, as you recall. And we did constant marine amphibious landings, and part of it was to train the 1st Army Amphibious Corps in their landings too before we went overseas.
Now, you were using the old Higgins boats where we had to
The
go
old
over the
original
side?
Higgins boats, that's right. Right. The, what do you call the Navy has a underwater team that operated at that time.
Underwater Demolition Team, UDT.
Yeah. And they have a national organization, you know, a museum established in Fort Pierce, Florida. And we've been to that a lot of times because we lived in the south along that coast. And they had at one time Higgins boats, the original Higgins boats, on display there, as a matter of fact. I don't know what they've done with them since then. That was the old Higgins boats, were beached, and then you climbed over the side to make a landing. That's what we used when we landed in
Guadalcanal?
Guadalcanal.
Okay. How long were you at Lejeune?
Well, we had 16 weeks of training at Lejeune. At that time was basic training. Had a long training. They shortened it to 12 and sometimes a little less than that after, when draft came in and other regulars were brought into the service. At that time when I joined, there were only regulars in the Marine Corps. There were no draftees, and there were all no reserves. They were all regulars signed up.
Was there a change in the tempo of training after Pearl Harbor? Do you think they changed training, made it more rigorous and so on, or was it about the same?
I don't see any, didn't see any real change in it. It still stayed as rigorous as it was. That's the Marine Corps.
Right. Okay. When did you end up going out into the Pacific?
We were the 1st regiment into the Pacific area in April of 1942. We were shipped out, went through the canal, ended up in Samoa, Western Samoa, 1942. We were the 1st regiment, combat regiment, out of the United States.
Now, how long were you in Samoa?
We're on Samoa about, let me see, well, we went out in April and August, between since April and August. We were there. Then the landing on Guadalcanal came.
Now, were you given the M1, or were you still using the old 3s?
We were still using the old 3s at that time.
You used them right on Guadalcanal too, or did you get the M1 before you?
Let me see here. We use the old 3s, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
But there was some time in there that they did switch over to the M1 rifle. I can't remember when. I was a platoon sergeant at that time, and I was issued, instead of the M1, a carbine at that time, and a pistol. NCOs in the Marine Corps were issued pistols and a carbine at that time.
Now, could you describe your landings on Guadalcanal?
Well, the Marine Corps landed in Guadalcanal, and again, I guess, as you've heard, there wasn't much opposition to the landing.
Right.
And everybody went inland, practically up to Henderson Field, to the airport, and then organized our lines up there on the high ground and so forth, and that's when the combat started after that. Japanese invaded, but initially on the beach there was just sporadic sniper fire and things like that when we landed. It wasn't such as Cape Gloucester, the next operation, for example.
What was life like on Guadalcanal?
Well, it wasn't too good. A lot of wet weather, a lot of swamps, a lot of mud, a lot of dirt, a lot of malaria, a lot of no food. The Navy dumped us on Guadalcanal. Again, I have a couple books here. I got the original book that was written about Guadalcanal, The Old Breed. That has a complete history of the 1st Marine Division, and it's the best written book I've ever read about Guadalcanal as far as that's concerned. And it tells you there how we were dumped on Guadalcanal, and the Navy had to pull out because the Japanese came in with their fleet. They were going to sink all our ships and everything. Naturally, those old type of ships that we had for transports. So they pulled out and went back to Australia and left us there. And we didn't see anybody practically for 5 months. We thought we were expendable at one time, as a matter of fact. So it was a pretty tough combat experience. Yeah, we were there. You thought you were all alone.
Could you describe some of the encounters with the Japanese you had while you were there?
Well, there's several battles listed in the Old Breed book that tells you about some of the hills and so forth, the combat that they had, and trying to break through our line. The 1st Marine Division from Guadalcanal campaign awarded 2 Medal of Honors. One was to John Basilone, the other was to Mitch Page. Mitch Page finally, he stayed in the Marine Corps and retired as a colonel. He passed away now. John Basilone went back. He got tired of doing bond work for the service, so he volunteered to go back overseas again. And he went back for the Iwo Jima campaign and got killed on the beach at Imo, got hit with shrapnel. So it was a lot of different battles. It wasn't any just one big battle taking place at all times. You might go for 2 days or something, then they'd hit the lines again. But we established lines all around Henderson Field in Guadalcanal, and that was our basic defense. So we needed the airport too at that time. And it was constant all the time, especially night battles. Japanese at that time were famous for attacking at night. So you didn't get much sleep, no matter where you were sleeping, leaned against a tree or what it was. So it was pretty bad.
Now, what kind of food did you have during those times? I know they called it Starvation Island. What were some of the...
We started out with, you said what did we have in the beginning from World War I? Well, World War I had a bunch of what's called sea rations left over. That's canned stuff. So that's all we had when we went in. But the Japanese came down the slot there and chased all of our ships out. And all we had was what was able to unload at that time before they had to evacuate. So we ended up eating captured food from Japanese, hardtack and fish heads and whatever you could live on. So in addition to the hardships we had there, the rations were very bad too.
I noticed you mentioned you had contracted malaria. Was it while you were in Guadalcanal?
Absolutely. There were almost, I think, 6,000 people even that survived here that ended up with malaria from Guadalcanal. That was one of the bad things there.
What about medical supplies? Was there a major shortage of them?
Major shortage of medical supplies too. What we had and went in with is what we had to live with. You might have one thing of humor in the supplies. We captured a lot of Japanese food dumps, they called them. And they had these big 1-gallon containers, no labels on them. They were kind of gold-colored metal. And in those containers, one area where we captured, we opened them up and they were tangerines, these little slices of, not the tangerines, what do you call these small, looks like tangerine, you know.
Mandarin orange?
Yeah, that type. They were great for that, for dessert. So everybody thought when they captured those that that's what they were going to get these art to eat on. But a lot of the same cans also contained fish heads in oil. And we captured a lot of these, and guys were burying them. They were digging places in the side hills and burying these things so we'd have something to eat. Then you go to shake it, and you go to open it, there was a bunch of fish heads in there. Oh, God, it was something.
Now, how long were you on Guadalcanal?
Well, we were relieved in February, from August to February. So it's 5 months, I guess you could say, before they relieved us. They finally did come in to relieve us and took us back to Australia. We went back to Australia to reorganize and with troops and equipment and everything else. But we were only at that time, I guess you'd say 1/3 efficient even. By the time we got back, counting all the malaria and everything. A lot of people were shipped back to the United States with malaria from Australia. There was a place in California, Klamath Falls it was called, where they shipped a lot of the Marines back for rehabilitation from malaria at that time. So we had to wait until we got a lot of new troops in, and a lot of them were reservists at that time coming into service for the next campaign, which was Cape Gloucester, New Britain.
Could you talk about that a little bit?
Well, Cape Gloucester, New Britain was a different campaign altogether. They attacked us right after we hit the beach. We did get on the beach and got inland, and there wasn't much of a beach, so-called there. It was, you got ashore and you ran right into the jungle practically. So the minute we got into the jungle and started going forward, the Japanese air, which had a big base in Rabaul at that time, New Britain, and they started bombing us with these. I don't know, the bombs hit the trees and spread well, they all split up. What's the word I'm thinking?
Shrapnel?
Shrapnel all over there. Yeah. They came down and hit a lot of the troops from the trees and bombing there. But we didn't hit any big resistance until a couple days after we got inland in Cape Gloucester. And then they attacked it too. So again, we went and had to get, they were on the high ground at that time. They had occupied all the high ground, all the hills and everything. And so it was a matter then of attacking them on the high ground and capturing the high ground. And that campaign was just as bad, if I would consider it, as Guadalcanal, because we hit on Christmas Day, and it rained, and it kept raining for I don't know how long, 30 days or more. We didn't get much break. It was constant rain and mud and everything. So that was a pretty bad operation too in the beginning. But we were there for about 3 months before we were relieved there. You know, it's ironic the length of time that we stayed in some of these places. The Marine Corps, again, I say, I don't know whether you acknowledge it or not, I know the Marine Corps is trained to take over and occupy a place and take it over, and then somebody comes in and relieves it, the Army or somebody else. We're not meant to stay there for 3 months or 5 months and occupy the place. We're going to knock it out and somebody else. That's what the Marine Corps is trained for on this amphibious program. So again, we got stuck there for several months. And then that became bad too, as far as food is concerned and everything else. Jungle fighting can be pretty bad. You can't see the enemy, you don't know who's shooting at you and anything else, where the lines are, and all of that.
Do you have to take special care of your carbine to keep it from...
You have to keep special care of it, right. You practically sleep with it to keep your ammunition, everything dry. The next thing you got to do is keep your crotch dry, keep your chest dry. That's the main things you got to do in this rainy weather. So you use your poncho or whatever you have to keep your chest dry and your crotch dry. Otherwise,
how about your feet?
And your feet's going to get wet no matter what you do. Yeah. Entirely different operation than what the Marines are going through now in Iraq.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was going to ask you that later on, but how do you feel about the mission of the Marines now, where they're there for extended periods of time?
Well, without getting in politics, I'm going to tell you how I feel right now about it. They made a commitment And most of Congress supported it at that time, including all the Democrats who are backing out of it at the present time. And you can't do that. You've got to finish the operation. They've got to finish it somehow. Congress got to get together and decide how they're going to finish it. You've read in the paper, you've read in a lot of the magazines. There's a good article just now in Newsweek on the back page about why we shouldn't pull out of it now. I mean, when you realize the type of disaster that's going to take place if we pull out of Iraq at the present time and leave them there, I mean, it won't be just the Middle East. It could spread worldwide. Mm-hmm. It could create another world war, as a matter of fact. Mm-hmm. So the people that want to pull out of there at this time, politicians are not, as far as I'm concerned. I don't have any play for them at all. They don't know what they're talking about. They've never been in the military, half of them. More than half, 75%, 85%, I don't know. There's only very few people in Congress today who have served in the military, as a matter of fact, in combat particularly. Mm-hmm. So you can't leave the troops that are over there. It'll not only be a disaster for them, be for the people that they've left there. You know, in combat, your heroes aren't the people who come home. It's the people who stayed there, got killed, and are left there. That's your heroes. Mm-hmm. And that's who you feel for.
After you left Gloucester and Britain, New Britain, where did you go on leave?
Well, there was a campaign in between there called New Guinea. That was a short campaign, very short campaign. And then after that, I went back to a place called Provuvu, island of Provuvu, and I was sent back to the States because I had almost 30 months overseas at that time. And I was sent back for training, and on Cape Gloucester, I was awarded a Battlefield Commission. And Colonel Puller at the time was one of them that interviewed me and signed the commission too with Colonel Frisbee. Anyway, I came back and I was serving over there in Cape Gloucester in the Combat Intelligence section. And I came back and went up to the Army Combat Intelligence Training School in Maryland. And after I finished that, they shipped me back out again to Guam. I went back for the Guam campaign. So I served in the 1st Division and the 3rd Marine Division. And for EWO, the 3rd Division had the 1st and 2nd regiments were committed for EWO. The 3rd, which I was sent out to, was held in reserve. So by the time I got there, the first 2 had left, and the 3rd was in charge of continued the mopping up of the Guam campaign and reserve for EWO if they needed us. Fortunately, EWO wasn't necessary, and therefore I didn't have to participate in EWO. Mm-hmm. I'm thankful for that anyway.
Now, how is Guam different than the other campaigns that you had been in?
Well, Guam, all the islands are about the same. There's a lot of jungle, a lot of mud, a lot of, they call them rivers. They're not rivers, they're really creeks, you know. The widest one might be 50 yards at the mouth, but anywhere from 20 to 30, 40 yards wide. But as we know them here, they would be called creeks, they're not rivers. And a lot of those you have to wade through, cross over, defend, and so forth. So it was much the same operation. All your island operations are basically much the same as far as defense and going from one objective to another objective.
Now, what was your assignment or your role on Guam as being in intelligence?
I was then a lieutenant, and I was assigned as a lieutenant in the 2nd Command of the Regimental Combat Intelligence Section, R2 section, in intelligence. At that, in the service, combat intelligence has to report to the commanding officer and notify him, tell him where the enemy is at all times and what's involved. So we've got a lot of patrolling to do and a lot of other things to do to notify taking care of the maps and so forth, to let the commanding officer know what's going on in front of him.
Mm-hmm. What was your opinion of the Japanese as a soldier, as an enemy?
Well, some of them were good. The Japanese soldier was, I think, overplayed at one time and overemphasized, because some of them were good, especially we met some of the best ones on the canal. There were a couple brigades on the canal that were real good, and some of the others were not that good. They were like maybe reservists too that were sent down from Japan. When the Japanese, when we invaded Guadalcanal, the Japanese at that time, most of their troops were spread throughout the Pacific on different islands. So they had a brigade on one island, a brigade on another island. A brigade at that time, they were basically the same as us in brigade strength. It's like 2 regiments. So they were spread in different islands. So they had to bring these brigades in from the different islands to try to combat us. So our job was not only to keep them in our Air Force there, it was to keep them from landing these brigades, but then fight them if they did land. The Japanese on Guadalcanal lost about 30,000 troops killed. We lost about 6,000, I guess, troops killed, actual killed. But we had a lot of wounded, of course, 20,000 more wounded, and then with malaria on top of that. But in general, some of their better troops were good fighting troops. They would fight an attack at night, and it was like they were all charged up. It was like a bonsai, you know, like they were on drugs or something. They would charge right into our lines on top of a defensive hill. We would put wire out, and then they'd come charging up the hill, and they'd run in there, and they'd run in and screaming and hollering and yelling like they've been smoking something. And maybe they had, I don't know. But
How do you compare our weapons to theirs?
well, I think there's a lot of controversy about the weapons that the Marine Corps is getting. Sometimes the Marine Corps gets second choice of some of the better weapons, and some of them I think they pass over on us to experiment with even to see if they're going to hold up. But in general, the weapons we have today I think are the best in the world for defending. As long as we get them, as long as we get enough of them, and we get them in time. This is constantly the argument with Congress that we have today. The Marine Corps appropriations for everything comes through the Navy, and the Navy has to appropriate enough money so the Marine Corps is then really supplied with what they need to carry on an offensive campaign.
Now you said you were struck with shrapnel 2 times. Where was that?
I got hit in shrapnel in the head. It didn't enter my head. I got hit in the back with my pack on. It didn't hit my back, so I didn't qualify for a
Purple Heart?
What do you call it? Purple Heart, unless I wanted to dig a hole in my back myself. That shrapnel, by the way, I got hit with was on Cape Gloucester when they were Japanese Air Force was bombing us with these daisy cutters, we used to call them, these bombs that they would drop. They'd hit the trees and spread the shrapnel down through the trees.
How did you feel when you heard about the dropping of the atomic bombs?
Saved my backside. I was on Guam at that time, and I think everybody was stationed any place in the Marine Corps was happy to hear. You know, President Truman was not a true friend of the Marine Corps at one time. He wanted to mix the Marine Corps in with the Army troops and so forth, so he wasn't a true friend. But when he dropped that bomb there, everybody thought he made the right decision, and as far as I'm concerned, he sure as hell did, because it ended the war. Part of the campaign that I was sent out there last for was to land on Japan. That's what the 3rd Marine Division, and being held in reserve in any battalion or regiment that's held in reserve in the Marine Corps, then next heads the next landing that takes place, that regiment. So we would have been one of the lead regiments in that landing on Japan, and we would have lost, I don't know, 2 million troops maybe. We landed there. They were well defended. Everybody, the kids, the women, everybody was ready to defend Japan. They were ready to fight till the death. It would have been one terrible battle. So President Truman made the right decision as far as I'm concerned.
Of all the combat that you saw, what would you list as being the worst?
Guadalcanal.
Why?
Well, it was the first one, number one, and no matter how well trained you are, we went into Guadalcanal with no real training or combat planning on what to do once we were there, other than set up the lines and defend the island and defend that airport. We had no idea what the enemy would do, what they could do, or anything. So we initially had to find out what was going on with the Japanese army at that time. So that made it further difficult as far as combat was concerned.
Were you in any of the expeditions on Guadalcanal that went out after the Japanese?
Combat intelligence patrols all the time. We patrolled beyond the front lines and patrolled and established what they called forward observation posts. A lot of your artillery people, you have forward artillery observation. They went with us. They wanted to get in our place because we were out beyond the lines on high points to see. So we were out in front, yeah. At times we had to go through the lines and go out and patrol and find out where the enemy was so we could notify the one case.
Were you involved in the occupation of Japan at all?
No, they sent me back after that. I had enough points at that time when they picked the Marines or anybody over there. I guess the Army was the same way, that had enough points, time over there in combat. You were the first ones of choice to go back.
Where
So
did you go
naturally,
once you came back?
I went back to San Francisco. First I was stationed in San Francisco for about a month at Treasure Island, and there was nothing to do there. They didn't know what to do with us except go on liberty. So I kept sending home for money, and my wife, I was married then, said, "What's going on out there? If you don't come home pretty soon, I'm coming out there to find out what's going on." So I've kept putting in for a transfer, and the next, they did transfer me next to a place called the Brooklyn Navy Yard. And I was officer of the day at the Sand Street Gate Station in Brooklyn, New York. And that went on for 2 or 3 months before I was relieved to inactive duty. I was still, they didn't relieve you, and I don't know whether it was because I was a combat promoted officer or what it was, but they didn't relieve you from active duty in the Marine Corps at that time. They still held you in the reserve, and I was in automatically active reserve, ready to be recalled. But at that time, you could not be recalled again in my position, except if it was a war, declared a war by Congress. That's why when the Korea War broke out, they couldn't recall me, couldn't ask me, or draft me to come back in, you might say. They wanted to know if I wanted to come back in voluntarily and serve, and I would receive a permanent commission as captain of the Marine Corps at that time. Well, by that time I had 2 children, I had a job established in my own business, and I decided I wouldn't go back into service. That's why I stayed out of the service, active duty. And I still stayed in the reserve and went to training every year for 2 months and so forth, 2 weeks, excuse me.
And you stayed there
Quantico, Virginia.
until 1957?
That's right.
Okay. When did you leave the active Marines?
In 1946.
All right. Did you ever make use of the GI Bill?
Sure, I went back and finished college, went to college on the GI Bill. When I joined, I went into service from high school. So I went back and attended college and finished college. And my first job, I went to agriculture, I studied agriculture. And my first job was the Ross and Purina Company. That's a feeds and feeding company. And I went with that.
Did you ever make use of the 5220 Club?
Yeah, I took that too. Why not?
Yes.
Everybody else did.
Do you join any veterans organizations at all?
Oh yeah, I belong to the Marine Corps League. I belonged to the Marine Corps League for a number of years. I'm past commandant of the Marine Corps League, and we do a lot of work in the Marine Corps League. As I explained to you, we're not only challenged with making sure that future Marines that come out of the service stay in with the Marine Corps, contact with the Marine Corps somehow. We do other projects, the Toys for Tots is a Marine Corps project. We do service work at the cemeteries. We do a lot of volunteer work in the Marine Corps League.
Do you belong to the American Legion or?
I belong to the
VFW?
American Legion also. I'm not as active in that though. Belong to the Elks organization. I'm a 53 year member of Elkdom also.
Okay.
Those are my three main organizations. I belong to also to the Military Officers Association.
Did you ever stay in contact with anyone that was in the Marines with you or in service with you?
Up to a point, yes, but lately, no. No. I'm also a member of what's called the Guadalcanal Veterans Organization, or very few of us left in that organization. And I went to the national meeting last year, which was held in Washington, and I saw nobody that I knew or anybody else. They're mostly younger than I am to begin with. So I didn't meet anybody I really knew. Half of that organization today includes the Navy. The Guadalcanal campaign allows for membership Navy personnel that served on the troop ships that landed us on Guadalcanal. So we have a lot of members from the USS Fuller, Elliott, and so forth that belong to the Guadalcanal Veterans Organization.
How do you think your time in the service changed or had an effect on your life?
Well, I'd say very much.
In what ways?
It established discipline, you might say. It established a knowledge of the military. It made me patriotic to support the military organizations, and I guess eventually to talk to people like you, tell you what it's all about.
If you hold this up, could you tell us where and when that photograph was taken?
This is when I was commissioned a first lieutenant, or second lieutenant, excuse me. I can't jump a rank. Second lieutenant.
Okay, and when were you commissioned?
And I was commissioned in April 1944.
Okay.
I was actually received the commission in 43, but it didn't reach me till 44.
Okay.
I received the paperwork and the bars and so forth.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Now, Wayne focuses in on that up there. I notice you have your 1st and 3rd
1st Marine
Division patches.
3rd Marine Division.
Let's see, I'm getting some
And
glare.
Those are the miniature.
Let me turn this off a second. Let's try it again. All right.
Wait till I get my piece of paper here.
See a bronze star with a V for valor.
Yeah. This is the Marine Corps Good Conduct one. This is for the Asia Pacific with 4 stars. So there are 4 major. Each star represents a major battle, major landing, not a major battle. With each one of these stars, there were probably 10, 15 battles in there. So that's what that represents. And these are your medals you receive from boot camp, sharpshooter and all your bayonet, pistol, and so forth medals. The Marine Corps issues medals, awards you medals like this depending on your training and recruit training station.
Okay.
And these are different reserve and victory medals and so forth. Down below here are my Marine Corps League medals, past Commandant, and so forth.
Okay.
These are just some of the reminders I put up here. This, by the way, not too many people know what this is. This is the National Order of Battlefield Commission medal.
Oh, okay.
This one here.
Yeah, I don't think we've ever seen one of those
No.
before.
You have to belong to the National Order of Battlefield Commission to get that medal. You just can't send away for it.
Now, why
Okay.
were you commissioned on the battlefield? What, you must have done something particular that...
Well, you don't have to be commissioned for It's not like the Medal of Honor, you know,
Mhm,
saving
right.
somebody. It's just for
Right,
the heroic
just-
duties
okay.
that you perform
Okay.
on the service.
Mhm.
This is the medal, the commission receipt you get here. For outstanding combat leadership while under and against an armed forces enemy while serving in the armed forces of the United States of America. I guess you'd say it's mostly for leadership and things that you do.
So you received that while you were in Cape Gloucester in New Britain?
Yes. Yeah, when I got off of Guadalcanal, I was a platoon sergeant.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much for your interview.